Welcome back, everyone, to the Table of Strangers podcast. My name is Anthony,
My name is Zaniel.
and today we will be talking about big topic.
Hell and the truth we'd rather avoid. Let's be honest. Not a lot of people like to talk about hell. We don't like to confront the common concerns it raises, whether it's real, fair, or loving. Um, but if we look back in history, Jesus, of all people, spoke about it more than almost anybody else. Um, he talked about it consistently throughout the New Testament. Um, so it should definitely be a common concern and conversation in Bible readings, taking notes with people at church. It definitely should be talked about because it's not something you could just sweep under the rug and never conversate about. It's a big deal. So we're going to be going over first, is hell a real place? And kind of a complex answer is kind of yes, but it's more than just theorized as a physical place away from God. There are geographical imagery that are listed throughout the New Testament and Old Testament of what this place looks like. Some people think of like Gehenna, which is described as a valley that was outside of Jerusalem where they would burn trash and old stuff would die, and that's where a lot of people get the fiery image thing. But there's actually not really any research that backs that up. In actuality, it was a area in which people would practice idolatry and the sacrificing of babies and stuff like that, which was not to say the most common thing, but it was pretty common when it came to the worshiping of other gods back then. There are written stories in the Old Testament about civilizations being wiped out by God's wrath for that fact is they were worshiping other idols, killing babies, committing all kinds of atrocities in different areas. So there's more of a description towards that rather than the valley. There's such things as outer darkness described, most of these described in Matthew, honestly. And that's more of kind of like an image that shows like separation and banishment. Um, and many more of these names exist. There's tons of them. Fiery pit, all those things. But it's not really too important what name it consists of. It's more of the defining characteristics that are describing hell that are kind of to watch out for and things that really kind of open your mind up to what hell really is. Um, it shows that not only that there's a physical description from God's love, but a consciousness who suffers from the lack of God's love surrounding them. So it's not just that there is, you know, there's the eternal darkness, which can be described as separation, but it's also a battle of your own consciousness for the fact that you are no longer surrounded in God's love. God's love is now away from you. He is now listened to your heart, which has cried out that you don't want his love. You've rejected it. And now he has withdrawn his love from you. And so you are in like a suffering of a different magnitude, really. I mean, I couldn't imagine being without God's love of any kind. So it's kind of more of like a conscientious torment, um, not torture, because torture is completely different than torment. Torment's more internally. You can make decisions that torment you, you know, while other things would be afflicted on you for torment or torture. My bad. Um, some they there's a lot of like differences, so it's like really as collective two or three of kind of how people describe hell besides the fiery pit and all that. Some do believe that basically there's a possibility that it's just someone who has had a heart that has completely hardened, and now you're just being exposed to the fullness of God. And it's like, when you spend your whole life in a dark cave and you come outside and the sun's just glaring at you, you can't open your eyes, it's too bright, it hurts to even be in the presence of the light. And it would be on a different magnitude. So like there's the concept of that as well. um Jesus warned of hell not to scare us, though. It's to warn you. You know, if you have a parent that tells you not to do something, or else there's consequences, it's not to scare you, it's to warn you to not make that decision because there are consequences for your actions and what you do. And then that kind of sums up pretty much all the different descriptions. There's obviously more fine tuning. There's not really a set in stone picture that is quite literally painted that you can just look at and say, "Oh, that looks like hell." So it's not really a mapped out image of what hell is. It's more of, yep, it's a place away from God, and here's all the defining features that are going to take place when you're there. It's not going to be great. You're going to be without God's love, far from it, and it's not going to be fun because God's love is truly what makes life cherishable, and it gives you enjoyment. Any good that's ever happened in your life came from God's love, not from your input of any kind. Um, and then, kind of a second thing for this is, why would a loving God send us to hell or allow people to go to such a place? And, there's that C.S. Lewis quote that I believe I've said before. Um, Hell is not a dungeon God kind of throws people away into. It's more of a room that you lock yourself into. Um, that's a pretty common quote that a lot of people throw around, and there is a little bit more into it. That I've heard some people describe it as a little bit different, but it's even shown in Book John in chapter 3, verse 18, and it says, "Whoever does not believe is condemned already." So God gives us the dignity of choice. And if we choose to separate ourselves from God, He's not going to force it. You know, there's plenty of people that go outside, you meet somebody, and then they continuously try to force themselves on you. Want to hang out, want to do this, blah, 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 blah. You're not always going to want to even associate yourself with such a person if they're consistently forcing themselves upon you and you have no similar affections towards them. And God knows that, you know. He's your creator. He's at a completely different level. He knows your heart very well. So if he knows that if all he's going to do, if he tried to be in your presence is you hate him even more, he's not going to continue trying and going because you're not going to. You're just going to get worse. So he just completely separates himself. And him separating himself from you, although it does take away all the advantages of being with God, you don't have his love. So a lot of times, especially with you see it nowadays, all these people that have thrown God to the wayside, they begin to become just honestly hateful. They're really aggressive. They don't want to hear you speak if you conversate with them. They're about themselves. They become selfish. They they want to do what they want to do. They do not care about the consequences of their actions really. And that's quite literally the downfall. Your heart begins to harden, and you throw God away, so your life is no longer going to be surrounded by his love. So it just gets worse. And it's not great. But we also have, so hell confirms also God is just. It's not just that God's loving, but he's just. You honestly need to be just in some way, shape, or form to even significantly have love. If I loved my dog, I also have to be held accountable for taking care of it. I also have to be held accountable if I end up accidentally killing the dog. Because if I'm not doing what I'm supposed to maintain the relationship, the consequences are no relationship. So there are severe consequences also to your actions. Plenty of people nowadays, they don't realize that most of these moral consequences that we think have just been made up by man, they don't really validate anything unless there is God. Because if we were just all animals and created by nothing, and evolution brought us up and all these different things, there would be no consequences for your moral actions because it would all be relative. And that's just kind of like a whole in itself. And if God ignored the evil, he wouldn't be a loving God. You couldn't have a police officer that ignored your crimes. He wouldn't be a good cop, would he? He wouldn't be able to hold the laws to anybody, and there would be no place that is truly safe. So, why would God punish someone eternally for such a temporal sin, some might ask? Well, he's eternal, infinite God. So, nothing in terms of him is like finite. It's more than just this one little thing. It'd be like if I murdered Anthony, I should be held accountable and get the most severe punishment equal to the crime. It would be pretty crazy if I murdered Anthony and I just got a slap on the wrist and it was like, don't do it again. You wouldn't be able to say that that's truly just, which, although we're getting a lot of crime like that nowadays, God's not like that. He knows your heart, He knows your actions, so He will judge you righteously and the way He's supposed to. He knows all the laws, He's written down all the commandments, so He knows everything you've broken, and He will judge you accordingly. And He will judge you fairly. So there should be kind of no potential for saying, he's sending me here forever. I don't deserve that. It's a little selfish to think that any of us deserve anything if we've already broken all these laws. You know, we stopped listening from the get go. So who are we to judge the punishment that's given to us when we were created by this one person who gave us all these laws and regulations, and we can't even abide by those, even though he loves us so much that even though we broke all those laws, he came down, suffered alongside us, and gave us the gift to be forgiven for all the bad stuff we do, even on a day to day. It kind of all goes back to pride, the the ability to think that you're better than anything. The devil was ranking at the top for it. He lived in the presence of God. He knew God exists, you know. We got the problem with a lot of people today. They'll just be like, "I believe God. I believe God." You try to talk to them. "I believe God. I don't really want to talk about it." You might believe God, but so did the devil. And if you don't choose to follow God or any of his commandments, you will be just the same. And that's honestly the problem with the world today. A lot of people think they can just believe in God and not follow the things he tells us to do, whether it be love thy neighbor, love him, No one's really following all those things. So to just be a believer in God doesn't really mean anything.
I also want to add on top of that
Yeah.
too that there's a false perception that everyone goes to heaven, and there's a false perception, especially um, pastors who go to funerals, and nearly all of them have to lie to ensure the family's comfortability. And while they're talking, they'll say like rest in peace or like heaven has gained a new angel, etc. But in actuality, that's not at the case half the time, especially knowing the fact that I believe it was Jesus himself who said that there will be more people in hell than heaven. And knowing that to be a fact, you really got to ask yourself, and it hurts to say it, but think of your mom, think of your dad, your uncle, your aunt, whoever it is that has passed away. You got to be honest with yourself on where are they actually. Now, who am I to say where they're at? I'm no one, but God has authority to say where they're at, and you can still pray for them even though they're dead. You can pray for them. You can pray to God for them, and I guarantee you, I mean, I can't guarantee it, but God is very merciful. Definitely don't try to test his mercy nor grace. He's more merciful than you think. So if your dad, let's say, lived a life full of crime, unrepented sin, who am I to say, oh, yep, he's going to hell? I'm no one. But God, because he's the one who created the story, he can also he is the author of life and death. He is the author of everything. And guess what authors can do? Authors can change the script. Authors can change the course of things. So if your dad, let's just say hypothetically, is destined to hell, you can still pray for them because God counts every tear that comes down from your eye, and he takes it all, he melts every time. He could be mad at you. Oh, Anthony's sinned. I'm so angry with him. Why would he go back to that same sin? But the second he sees my tears and I'm repenting and I'm begging God for mercy, guarantee you he melts every time with you too. He will melt down and comfort you and raise you up with his righteous right hand. He will raise you up and guide you. And I also wanted to add on too for the first side of your paper,
Hmm.
um, Judgment Day. When we get to Judgment Day, especially for the first judgment, and all of the unrepented unbelievers, etc., they will experience God's full glory. Jesus in all his glory, God the Father in all his glory, heaven in all of its glory. They will experience it all and then gone just like that. And they will be destined to hell. And like he said, hell is more of a conscious thing, which I truly believe in that too, because hell is not always, it's not, there's other definitions for hell. And even Jesus, I think it's Jesus who says that the people who go to hell, they're going to be, uh, they're going to feel miserable that they didn't change. They're going to want another day to change. They're going to think about all the mistakes they ever made. They're going to think, why did I not turn to God soon? They're going to have all these miserable thoughts forever. Oh, I should have done this. I should have done this. But why do they feel like that? It's not just because they're in hell. It's not because of that. It's because they saw what they're going to be missing out on forever. They saw God Himself, the author of life, in all His glory for a second, and then they're in hell forever. That's why there's going to be struggling so bad for the rest of eternity because they know what God is like in all of his glory. So yeah, just wanted to add that on.
Yeah, yeah. I honestly thought you were going into the thing about basically that no one's in heaven right now, which is
That's another topic for another
yeah,
day.
yeah.
That's a whole
That's where I
nother
thought you were
topic.
going. I was like, oh,
No,
okay.
that's another
Um,
topic.
but just adding on to that, a lot of us, especially uh, so-called, followers of Christ, you can have a judgment towards somebody and judge what they've done in the flesh on earth, and then towards the end of their days, you're like, oh, they're going to hell. They did all these terrible crimes. They did this, they did that. They're going to hell. But you do not know their heart. Only God does. Not even the closest person to you will you know them internally as much as God. There's plenty of people that have done heinous crimes, even some of the worst. But if on their deathbed, even right before then, they repented and asked for Christ's forgiveness, then it's right there. You can't really step in between and give your judgment because it's only God's. It doesn't matter who it is. You go back not Old Testament, New Testament. What is it? Philippines or Philippians? However you say that. I get it mixed up.
Philippines.
But
Yep.
Paul was in prison. God shook the earth, and everybody basically got freed. One of the Roman guards was going to kill himself because it meant that he could be killed, his family could get killed for the fact that they took their job really seriously, you know? And Paul basically came up to him and said, "You don't need to do that, you know?" And he wanted to find out who this God is that Paul's always talking about. And he was forgiven as well. A Roman soldier, a Roman soldier that guarded prisoners and used to be in the military for them. The amount of people he's possibly killed and all the crimes he's possibly done in his lifetime, who knows? But even him, even a murderer, a thief, all that, he could be forgiven through God's love, not yours. So it's really not anybody's place to judge anybody at the end of the day, just God. And kind of back on subject here. If there wasn't a hell to, a punishment essentially that existed, there wouldn't be something that would magnify the beauty of what Christ had to do on the cross. You know, Isaiah chapter 53. He was pierced for our transgressions. He suffered for the things we did. If there was no consequence at the end of the day for the people that still rejected him, then it would be as if he did all this for nothing. And at the end of the day, we can all be forgiven. No consequences for whatever we do. Who cares? And that would just totally take away for the fact that he suffered on the cross for us. There'd be no point.
Yeah.
The importance of knowing hell is the grace you receive knowing what it costs to keep you from it. It's a place of eternal torment. It's not going to be fun for anybody there. They're going to have lots of regret. And it honestly almost takes way more work just to get to hell than it is to heaven. All you have to do is quite literally submit yourself to Christ, accept that He died for you. That's pretty simple. It's a hard path, but it's a very simple choice. It's a lot harder than the short, short life that you're going to live in the flesh, staying away from God, than it is going to be staying spiritual and being close to God. It's a lot harder over here because everything is just so glorified. But it's such a worthless path to go down this way because it's going to be an eternity of just torment. And it wouldn't be a good decision. There's a lot of people that are just like, I don't care. Life's bad. They don't realize how good life is right now compared to what could happen to you. if you don't choose the right path.
I'll add on that.
Yeah.
Um, there's there's the easy path and the hard path, and if things are too easy, there's something most likely something wrong. And if which there is, like for example, America, we have such an abundant amount of food. There's so much food. Anyone, like, it's almost impossible to starve to death in America. Like, yeah, you have homeless people, but that's like the small amount of population in America. So majority get full stomachs every single night. It's almost you have to purposely starve yourself, right? So if and what's the downside about having such an abundant amount of food? Now, because it's so easily accessible, now there's the risk of obesity. Now there's the risk of getting uh, a little fat. Why? Because we have so much food, it's hard to just resist that donut, that ice cream, the extra meat that we don't need. We're just consuming, consuming, consuming. That's the bad part, is now temptation is going to rise up. So having an easy life, taking the easy path, there's always something bad about it. You don't want the easy road. Or living a mediocre life is also another good analogy. Living a mediocre life, you're gonna get mediocre results. If you never step out of your comfort zone and you take the hard path, maybe going to the gym right after work, going to the gym before work, doing something a little unmediocre, now you're going to get unmediocre results. So, taking the godly path, it's not easy. I fall all the time. He falls. Everyone falls. But just like Jesus said, the righteous man gets back up 7 times and gets up every single time. Falls down all the time, gets right back up. It's not easy. Following Jesus is not all sunshine and rainbows. It is the hardest thing in the world. It's easy, like he said, it's easy to get to heaven when you know how to get saved. Because the basis of getting saved is you believe in Jesus Christ, you believe that he's alive, that he rose from the dead 3 days later, and you repent daily. It's so easy, easier said than done, but that's the blueprint. Because in order to get to heaven, you have to be perfect, and none of us are perfect. There's no such thing as sin in heaven. It doesn't exist anymore, that is, because Satan was the first person to sin in heaven. But after that, once humans get up there, sin doesn't exist. It's impossible. So, yeah, just wanted to add that in there.
Yeah, I mean, you got to find humility, and it's not a fear tactic at all. Any and all people who have known punishment prior to what they chose to do, it never stopped them truly to do what they wanted to do. So at the end of the day, knowing the punishment that is to come isn't going to stop those who continuously are going to choose to stray from God. It isn't. Plenty of times your parents tell you that if you do this, this is what's going to happen. And you still did it. So knowing the punishment, no matter what it is, doesn't do anything. It's your decision. That's why people still go to prison for murder, thieving, all kinds of stuff. It doesn't really matter. They know what the crime is. They know it's illegal. They know that they're going to get years in prison or executed, whatever it is. They know what the consequences are to their actions. They still chose to do it.
Time's almost up.
So, and the final question to just kind of lead us out is, if hell is real and Jesus died to save me from it, what does that say about his love, and how should the change how I see everything else? How should it change how I see everything else?
All right. Well, thank you guys for listening to this episode. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Um, any other religions who are listening, if you want to put in your 2 cents into the comments, by all means, because this is a pretty big topic, the topic of hell. But anyways, thank you all for listening, and we'll see you all in the next episode.